Hey, hello everyone. Hi Jake, hi Dan, hi Harneet. Thanks
Hey,
for
Shan.
having.
Morning, good evening,
Yeah,
and good
it's
afternoon.
yep, it's a good afternoon here in Melbourne. So we do have four weathers in a day, but today it's bright and sunny, which is great.
Not as good as it's supposed to be in London. It's still raining today.
Nice.
Well, would you believe it's actually raining here in sunny Queensland?
So usually it's the best weather around. Like whenever I've been in Queensland, it's the best. There's sunny and even in cold winters here in Melbourne. So just love it there. Yeah. All right. So, yep. Thank you all for joining. We'll start off with quick introductions. So let's start off with you, Jake.
Sure, no worries. My name is Jake Gillespie. I'm been working with ServiceNow, I guess, for about 12 years. Last 10 years in the consulting side, and a few years ago, 2020, I went through a ServiceNow training program that they call the CMA Certified Master Architect. So I graduated in that year with my cohort of good people, and yeah, I've been invited along here today. Most of the work I do, so I work for Enable Professional Services, which is now Enable Fujitsu company. We changed recently. Pretty much out of that 10 years, first 5 years was more as a consultant, technical consultant, hands-on implementing, developing. Then I spent a couple of years more as a technical architect, and then I've moved into solution architecture as well. So even though I've got a CMA badge, as we call it, I've kind of worked in a few different architecture roles as well as having that background in hands-on.
Nice, nice, and yeah, Jake, it's quite an extensive experience, right? And apart from being a CMA, you're also CTA. So, you know, we, I was grateful enough to be the same part of the same cohort as Jake. So yeah. All right, let's move on to Dan.
Good morning, afternoon, good evening. My name is Dan Gibbard. I've been working with ServiceNow for about 8 years. Actually started off as a technical trainer with ServiceNow, teaching all your standard sysadmin, scripting, etc. Got the itch to get back into the technical or development side of things, so moved into consultancy, and just worked my way through. And I finished the CMA last June. So fairly recent, although it's the program has, as far as I'm aware, changed quite a bit even since then. It's constantly evolving. So yeah, here to speak to you today and answer any questions you might have.
Nice, thank you, Dan. Harneet.
Thanks, Ishan, and thanks again, Jake and Dan, to be here this morning, this evening for you guys. So my name is Harneet. I am a technical architect working with Accenture. I've got 7+ years of experience on the platform, and I'm also a CTA as well. I think we've got 3 CTAs on the call today, and two CMAs and 2 MVPs. So I'm also a developer MVP as well. And pretty much today I'll be joining Ishan to make sure Jake and Dan are comfortable on this live stream. Over to you, Ishan.
Nice. Thank you, Anit. And yeah, so myself, Ishan, I'm a certified technical architect, working with EY as a solution architect, and yeah, love working with the platform. For being with the platform for 5+ years now. Yeah, it's just going great.
Amazing. So I think let's get right into it before the questions start popping up. I think in the CTA stream that we did, I think we just started looking at questions right from the right when we started off. So what we'll do is again, maybe Jake, open to you as a question. So can you just give a little bit background about what the CMA program is and a little bit about what you need to get into the program?
Sure, no worries. So I think it's pretty much the same as it was a few years ago when I did it. But Dan, please tell me if it's more up to date. In fact, just going back a few years ago, I won't tell a huge story, but there was rumors. We heard rumors about this architect program coming up. There wasn't a name for it yet, and I was keenly watching out for that. When it was announced, it was called Certified Master Architect, and a lot of my colleagues and I had this question, like, what is that about? Because it had this word master, and we had all these visions of Star Wars or something. Obviously, as we got more details and we went through the application process, which is quite extensive, you need to do a bit of research. So you need to, for example, find out how many projects have you worked on, what kind of roles have you had over a number of years. So that's one part of the requirement, I guess, to answer your question to get in is, I think it's around a 5-year mark is their preference for working in ServiceNow space, and ideally in an architecture space. There's also certification requirements. So from memory, you require a CSA, so admin cert, a CAD, a developer cert, and then 3 implementation certs. And for me, it was specifically ITSM plus 2 others. So sort of looking at 5 mainline certs as part of that, plus your experience. So my experience then, going into that, it was quoted as a 6-month program where you spent, I want to say maybe 8 hours a week. It's probably not the right roughly number, but we had multiple days in the week where we would meet, and we had webinars, we had some self-study. This is a balance of all that stuff, but it is a big investment. It's not a 1-week training course. It's quite a bit involved there.
Thanks, Jake. So Dan, would you also like to a little bit talk about what the selection process is? I think it's a little bit different than CTA, because CTA is a bit straightforward. Your company nominates you, you get into CTA program directly. But I believe the selection process for CMA is a bit different.
Yes, I suppose so. Outside of what Jake just spoke about in terms of requirements, it's much more like applying for a job, I would say, sort of filling in a sort of why you want to do this, what do you feel you're going to bring to the program, as well as what you want out of the program. So yeah, it does really make you sit down and think about, am I just doing this for a piece of paper? Do I really want this? Am I ready for this commitment? As Jake said, it's a big commitment.
Nice. So yeah, and do you also want to share some personal experiences, Dan? Let's start with you. So
about the program itself.
yep.
Yeah. Well, it was a journey, let's say. I think the best part of it for me was getting to see how other experts do things. So obviously you're in a cohort. Well, I was in a cohort with about, I think, 24 other people, sort of architects, that kind of level, working across different partners, people from ServiceNow itself. So it was, yeah, really interesting to learn from them. Obviously, you've got a lot of ServiceNow experts that come in and speak to you, but I found it most interesting speaking to the other people on the cohort and learning from them. And you end up with this lovely network of people afterwards as well, that you can, if you're struggling with some particular issue, or you have a question that is sort of a bit outside of the level that you can find on community or the developer sites, you've now got this sort of network of CMAs behind you that you can draw on. So I'd say that was certainly my favorite part, or my best part about the program.
Nice. So Jake, would you like to add some of your memories as well? Like, it's been a long while, but still.
That's right. No, the memories they're up here. I had really good memories. So similar to Dan's experience, like it's a cohort learning environment. So it actually was reminiscent of university, where you're in groups and in a class, and you're all trying to get over that hurdle. You want to get to the success, want to get to the end of the program. Weekly, we met multiple times. I was quite fortunate, I think, in that in 2020, in February when we kicked off, we actually flew to the US. So we went to Santa Clara to, I guess it's more of the senior leadership HQ for ServiceNow. So we went there. There's people obviously from Australia, from New Zealand, through Asia. We all went there and we kicked off in person, and that was big. We really kicked off on the right frame of mind, I guess. We do these online calls, not unlike this podcast. You get to see people on a screen, but meeting them in person, having jokes between the sessions, between the classes, we went out for dinner, we really bonded. And I recall walking into that room and very much feeling like, wow, you look around, these people have a lot of experience, a lot more than me. There were people with a lot more experience. Just as architects, I still felt fairly green in that area. And what we obviously learned from each other, we bonded, we came back, and then unfortunately, it was the COVID year, so everything was very much shut down and remote. So the rest of the program was online webinars and things, and I actually didn't see anyone else from that cohort again, except for people in Brisbane, of course, where I live. I didn't see anyone until the 2022 Knowledge in Sydney when a few of them went there. But to what Dan said, it was great because you do learn from each other. Like everyone brings something in, and I guess that is also why it's part of that requirement. Like what will you bring into the cohort and into the community if we accept you into the program? So there was, I think we had 6 people from ServiceNow, 3 who were working in architecture roles already. They obviously brought a lot of product information in, probably a lot of best practices as well. There were other people who had been architects for many years in different partner organizations. Some of them were more commercial than others. We had one person from ServiceNow who was on the pre-sales side, solution consulting, and I could drop his name because it's very complimentary. But on the first day, I recall Shelley Grieve, who ran our cohort back then from ServiceNow. She said, we've got one person here from solution consulting, so you'll have to work hard, sort of thing. And we all had this sort of joke, but in the end, he was absolutely the best. I thought he was amazing, and part of that, which I'm sure we'll chat about, is the process to graduate, which involves presentation skills. And Jerry had the best. Like he was an ace. So even though he didn't come from working as an architect, one of the key things we had to do in the program was really present with influence. He could do it really well. So I learned from him. I learned from the other architects. I learned from everyone around me.
Nice. And that's what, like, even like I have heard as well that these programs again are for networking, and like you get to network, you get to meet everyone. So same as knowledge, like we're bringing back the things that to back to normal. And yeah, so yeah, and again it's a mix of everything. So from what I have even like what I have heard is CTA and CMA, there's like CTA is more on the technical side of things. Again, we'll come to that as well. But like CMA is there to bridge the gap between the sales and the technical side of things of ServiceNow. So do you have any comments on that, or
Yeah, sure. I think you're right. So I said earlier when we first heard about it, we were wondering, what is this program? And I think some of our assumptions were it was a very technical program, and it isn't in that sense. I wouldn't also say it's super salesy, but you're right in that CMAs would be working with customers or with new opportunities at a time where customers will be looking to work out what investment should they make, when should they make it, what not just what products, but I guess what capabilities does ServiceNow offer, and aligning them with their requirements. So there would be some sales or pre-sales type collaboration for sure. But what a CMA would bring into that, of course, is a lot of depth in what the platform can do and what it should do. What is a good use case there. And once again, I won't talk too much about CTA just yet, but from a CMA perspective, the phrase that kept coming up was CMAs don't work in the weeds. they're more strategic. It's more high level, and it's more talking with say C-suite, like decision makers from ServiceNow customers.
Yeah. All right. So Dan, do you have something to share that as well in terms of personal experiences, or like what do you think about CMA program?
Just to echo Jake, really, don't go in there expecting it to be a very technical program. And once you've passed your CMA, once you are a master architect, get used to the idea that you're probably not going to be doing a lot more development in your job. It is something I miss. Obviously, I do try and get my hands dirty, as it were, as much as possible, but that would tend to be sort of side projects or my own time. Even for the maintenance points, you can't maintain the CMA qualification in a developer role. Okay, you have to be that sort of architect level, speaking to customers, understanding their requirements, and sort of building out their roadmaps for them. So yeah, that's word of warning for the techies among the audience. If you're a techie, go for the CTA.
Nice. And yeah, you just touched on one of the questions that I had in mind, and what, it was a popular question in the last session as well. Like, how do you maintain your CMA certification? So what goes behind after we have got it? Like, so is it easy? Is it too much of effort? So
It's a lot of effort, as it should be. So over a 2-year cycle, you have to maintain a certain number of points in thought leadership, continual professional development, and help me out, Jake. What's the other one?
Ongoing practice, I think.
Ongoing practice, yeah. So customer contact. As an example, the customer contact is 800 hours over 2 years. Okay, so it's fairly robust. Thought leadership is probably one of the more difficult ones to maintain. You get that by doing things like writing blog posts, doing podcasts like this. Mentorship, which is quite a good one. It's where I tend to get most of my hours, because I enjoy mentoring within my own team at my organization. And they've recently brought out the CMA program, an official CMA mentorship program. So the new cohorts that come in, they can pair them up with a CMA alumni and sort of guide them through the CMA program that they're going through, which is quite good. So yeah, that's a brief overview of what's involved in maintenance. Jake, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think you've summed it up right. But yeah, it's those 3 dimensions, isn't it? Some of it being actual practical work with customers in the field. Some of it is us keeping up to date by learning, by either taking training or reading documentation, and then that third one, thought leadership. So I found, I don't know about your cohort, Dan, but I think our cohort, the one that people struggled with to keep up was the thought leadership. There's maybe some creativity that's needed there to sort of find the opportunities for sharing the thoughts. So for me, I perhaps was a little bit lucky that I've volunteered a few times with Knowledge to do presentations there within Enable, within my organization. I also try to actively present and share knowledge. So I've had a few opportunities. How about you, Dan? What have you had so far? Is that the struggle, or?
No, thought leadership is fine for me, because, as I say, you can get that from mentorship. So it's nice that you can sort of go down 2 different paths for that one. If you're not particularly confident presenting or sharing things that way, you can get your points there through thought leadership, through mentorship. Although it is obviously the dream to get something in at Knowledge, but with 200 CMAs worldwide now, doesn't sound like a lot, but they're all
That's right.
they're all trying to get into Knowledge, so it can be a bit tricky. Sorry, I was just going to say the emphasis that they put on it is clear in that one of our sessions was from the great Chuck Tomasi, walking through his podcast studio and how to present that kind of content in an engaging way. So yeah, they put quite a bit of emphasis on that area.
I think we had it on CTA program as well. I think that's one of the sessions on a weekly basis where Chuck comes in, and again, it's a pre-recorded session, but how do we do podcast? How do you set backgrounds? How do you use a better mic? How do you do the lighting stuff? And again, it's quite helpful because you obviously are living in a world where most of the calls happens online. So obviously these things also help you when you are going into your regular office calls as well. The question
As
that I
you can
had
see, I
was,
took none of the advice. Sorry.
so Dan and Jake, so what if if you're not able to maintain, the sort of those pillars that you need to maintain your CMA certification? So what happens in that case? Do you have to just redo the exam, do the whole CMA program, or do you sort of have exceptions? So how does it actually work?
Well, I don't want to know, but I assume if you don't have the points, then you can't recertify. Perhaps there is a grace period. I'm not sure. I've tried not to let it go down. I have recertified once. In the September last year, I recertified, and I think it was maybe 6 weeks prior to that I managed to get the last few points on the last category that I was waiting, that I probably wouldn't want to leave it too much later.
I have heard they have just introduced a kind of recertification process if you do miss out on the maintenance points over the 2-year cycle. I'm not quite sure what that involves. I imagine it'd be a kind of another mini board review, and then potentially a small grace period to get the points that you're missing. But yes, as far as I'm aware, there is a recertification process at the moment. I imagine it'd be costly though. So yeah, don't let it slip is my advice. As with all certifications.
Absolutely.
So we do have a couple of questions here. I'll go with the first one. So I'm a practice lead. I'm presuming that this would be good for me to attain. So yeah.
So I must admit, I'm not sure what practice lead is. Like a ServiceNow practice, I'm assuming what that means. So the head of a ServiceNow practice at a company. Perhaps, I guess, going back to what I said earlier, at least my humble view on CMA is it's very strategic, and it's guiding from a customer perspective what to invest in and when to invest in. It's also promoting a lot of practices, such as you're a champion of OCM, organizational change management. You want to promote that as a good, valuable thing, because it sounds like there's a lot of customers out there who maybe aren't investing too heavily in that, or don't weigh too heavily on that. So that's probably one thing. If as the practice lead, yes, you might do that. On the sales comment that came up earlier, I guess as a practice lead, I don't know, I'm assuming again you could be more involved with managing a delivery team. I'm not sure if there's ServiceNow sales element in there as well, like solutioning. But if there was, then that would probably help CMA. I wouldn't say you have to do it, but it would be valuable to you.
Nice. Thank you, Jake. We do have another one from Martin. So would you talk a bit about the whole curriculum, key learnings, case study, if any? Also, what does a typical week look like for a CMA student? So that's
A lot of questions in a single question.
in a single question.
What I can say is that the curriculum, or not the curriculum really, but the structure has changed. As I say, it's a constantly evolving program, the CMA. But certainly the most recent experience, my experience was pretty similar to Jake's. About 8 hours a week. We had 2 sessions, 2-hour sessions per week, I believe, and then some things to do on your own time. Can't really talk too much about the case study. You're not supposed to, but it is, I would say, very real world, if you like. It is something that you would come across in the real world with real customers. I found it very useful. A little bit scary, but very useful.
Thanks.
So Dan, is it
I've been-
also sorry?
No, go on, honey.
So is it also similar to, I don't know if you know about the CTA program. So we have 13 weeks of study materials. We basically go through it, and every week we do present at the end of the week as well. So is it similar to the CTA program in the CMA program as well?
Yes, yeah. Everyone in the cohort presents to the rest of the cohort at some point. That's one of the sessions during the week. The other session is being presented to by someone from ServiceNow generally, or a previous CMA or CTA alumni on a sort of drilling down deep into a topic. And I believe that's one of the. I know you said that you had something from Chuck Harneet, but it was my understanding that was the main difference between the CMA and the CTA, in that you didn't get as much interaction with ServiceNow. It was just kind of the cohort presenting to each other was the main core of that program. Is that correct?
That
Just
is
out of
correct,
interest.
Dan. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I think for us, it's mostly about learning through those modules each week. And then towards the end on Fridays, we used to have 2 hours of sessions with the remaining of the cohort. And we used to present on the topic that we have just learned that week. So, and again, it's the same case study that we follow throughout the 13 weeks. So that is how the CTA program has been structured. So I think it's a good time to bring in that question. I think a lot of people have this question, and even I have this question. So again, Jake, you've done both the certification, CMA as well as CTA. Oh, there you go. So Jake, which one should you go for? And then again, what is the basic difference between both of these certifications?
Sure. Okay. So I guess I'll start with a fairly simple scenario, simple comparison. So CMA, as we said before, it's very high level, very strategic, not down in the weeds. Talking about the strategy, roadmaps, looking at what a customer should do, and talking with those who invest in it. A CTA wouldn't do that. They wouldn't have that same function. The CTA is lower level. I mean, we could say they work in the weeds in the sense that they have a lot of low-level technical understanding. They would be deciding on things, for example, like should a customer operate their ServiceNow environments with update sets or app repo or GitHub, or they'd be very much involved with technical governance, whereas say a CMA wouldn't probably be involved with technical governance, but they would be involved with like strategic, program level governance. So it's still governance, but just different groups, different context there. So my feeling for the role of a CTA is you're a bit more working on a solution and the customer's environments, whereas a CMA, you're more looking at the investment overall. I don't want to use the word salesy, but it is a bit about what are we spending on money? What are we going to get back? Where's the business value? And you'd be translating that to the customer decision maker, to the C-suite. You're saying, well, if we do things in this order, you will maximize your return. The CTA wouldn't have that conversation. I think they would be more working with ServiceNow platform owner, working with obviously the administration team, other developers. Perhaps they're even advising multiple vendors and service providers who are doing ServiceNow work. I mean, there's all shapes and sizes of ServiceNow customers that I found. Some are doing everything in-house, and then others have multiple ServiceNow partners and sometimes ServiceNow in there as well, working on that. So I would probably say the larger, more complex customers are the ones that would actually need the help of a CMA, and then probably multiple CTAs. And then smaller, less complex customers wouldn't need a CMA, but they could certainly get value out of a CTA.
So Jake, maybe this is just a personal question from my side. So Jake, you did your CMA first and then you did CTA. Is that correct? Or was it the other way?
Yeah, are you going to follow it up with like, that's silly. Why did you do that?
I really wanted to know but like obviously CT has got its own course and I think it keeps changing as well. So I think I'm 100% sure there's new content being added into the CTA program as well. But what was your thought to do both the programs, and why in that specific order?
Sure. Yeah, so I've had this question a few times because it is perhaps a little bit unusual. I'm not sure of the numbers globally, but I don't think there's that many people who do both. But if you go back chronologically, right, in 2020 there was no CTA program. So in 2019 when I actually applied, I was just super keen to get involved with whatever architect program ServiceNow had. And I did initially, when I first heard the rumors, I did think it would probably be a technical type of certification. So it was different, like to what my expectations were. I wouldn't say bad. It was obviously very, very valuable and a massive turning point in my career and in my life. I really enjoyed it, but it was different to that initial expectation. The reason I came around to do CTA was largely because I think with my background being more technical in the past, and what I like doing, and I think Dan sort of clicked on this earlier. He said, "Oh, if you get CMA, you won't be hands-on." And I do look for pet projects to still get my hands dirty. If you could imagine, like, we're IT people, but if I was a vehicle person, a mechanic, I'd be getting under the car on the weekends, right? Like I like tinkering with things. So I still look for pet projects where I can play with the new technology that ServiceNow have. I can research and I can learn. But day to day, the role of an architect isn't so much that. I picked CTA, one, because I wanted to know what that program was like, what it offered. And if you look at what it offers, it did seem to sit more with where I feel naturally in my career. I did CMA, and I probably didn't think that's where I was in my career. Like I said, I looked up to all those people around me. They had different roles, different backgrounds. Just like everyone, I guess I was nervous about whether I'd pass. Fortunately, I did pass, and I did graduate. But at the same time, what ServiceNow told us about the role, or what they thought, that role would be when you graduate, when you grow up and graduate, it didn't really align exactly to what I was doing. So some of that I do, and I can talk to that later if we still have time. But some of it I don't do, or I haven't done in my day-to-day role. Whereas CTA, I think, crosses it over a little bit with solution architecture on a per engagement, per solution basis. We're building integrations, or we need to implement something for a customer and they need data separation or automation of some kind. The CTA does kind of talk to that level, and that's my passion. That's what I like doing. And so my company, Enable, very generous. They let me to go into both programs and complete both. And then now I, of course, have the difficult task of trying to maintain both. So we'll see what the future brings.
Thanks, Jake. I think we've got a lot of questions. Ishan, should we take some of them now? Yeah.
I can speak to that one. So how does the board decide which topic concerning your CIS certifications you should present? They don't. It's entirely sort of when you're presenting to the rest of the cohort, you can present on anything that you like, whether that's something specifically to do with your CIS certifications, a project that you've previously worked on, or yeah, pretty much anything you like. And also the kind of final board review that you do, it may not contain anything to do with your CIS certifications. It contains generally about, I think the guidance for the final board review is you have to go in depth on at least 3 topics to kind of get full marks, 2 topics medium marks, 1 topic kind of needs improvement. But yeah, those topics may very well not be anything that you are certified in. The expectation is that you learn about the topics that will be in the board review during the program itself. I hope that answers your question, Halifa.
Thanks, Dan. We've got another one. What kind of soft skills has CMA focused on?
I might comment on that one. So one thing I probably didn't mention earlier when we were talking about the entry requirements into the CMA program is the certifications are very technical, implementer, and then the experience is based on architecture. But one thing, at least when I applied, I don't think it was that clear, and I think the newer application process does make it more explicit, is the ability to present and to communicate. So soft skills, verbal, written as well. So the question here, what kind of soft skills does the CMA focus on? I would say there is a heavy focus on verbal communication and presentation, also in influence. In fact, I dare say you need to be able to communicate with influence because, and once again, I don't want to give too much away of potential boardroom, but you're presenting and you need to be convincing. If you say stuff, if you say this is what we're doing, you should be prepared to back that up with, well, this is why. And so I think if I translate that into real world, if you were talking to a C-suite, a CIO, and you're trying to convince them that they should spend insert hundreds of thousands of dollars here or more on a solution, you should be able to address that and say this is where the value is going to come from. This is why you should do it this way and not this other way. So I think from a soft skill, yes, communication, but also influential communication.
Just to add to that, absolutely, yeah. Coming from a technical trainer background, I was obviously quite comfortable presenting, but a lot of people weren't. It's not something you have to be an expert in going into the program. A lot of the program is focused on those soft skills. Certainly from my cohort, I saw massive improvement in people's presentation skills. The thing that I found really interesting and most useful in the soft skills area myself was kind of teaching you how to ask and answer questions, how to have difficult conversations, when the conversation isn't going your way or the way that you want it to, how to bring it back sort of in line in a professional way without getting angry, things like that. Yeah, so the soft skills part of it was very useful for me, and it's obviously very useful for the role itself as well.
Nice. We do have quite a few questions that have come up in the chat. Hope we don't run out of time. The CMA prerequisite experience is pretty extensive. Large, complex nature, and history of partnering. Yeah, it is pretty extensive, right? So,
Yeah, I guess if I just think back, earlier on, maybe there were fewer candidates. I'm not sure. I think the demand is probably going up and down various times for the course. But when I answered those kind of questions, once again, I felt a bit green, compared to the other people that I ended up in the cohort with. I just answered them as best as I could. I gave and to Dan's point, it's like a job interview. You put forward your best foot. So I gave the best answers I could, and probably one area I felt a bit thin on was actual one-on-one experience with CIOs. I think I'd had maybe one meeting with a CIO, but I'd worked over the years with many people who were in maybe one down from the CIO in terms of hierarchy. So I just tried to talk to those, and I also talked to some of the more complex customers I'd worked with and the solutions. And like it's just like a job interview. You might not have the exact criteria. You put your best foot forward.
yep. And I think Jamie as well has covered the questions answer in the comments.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, I think we are up to date with the questions. So, Harneet, do we have?
I think there's one specific thing. Again, Dan and I work together on the project, so obviously there's definitely quite good learnings that comes from Dan. Dan, would you like to touch base on a little bit on how the CMA program changed your perspective, and so far, how are you using those learnings on an ongoing project?
Sure. I think something that Jake touched on briefly earlier, I think the way it's changed, the way that I look at things was the organizational change management part of the program that we learned about. So thinking about customers that aren't used to ServiceNow, aren't used to the idea, maybe don't even like the idea. Okay, so not just how do we implement a technical platform, how do we make that technical platform a success within the business? That, as well as a focus on governance and the importance of it. And yeah, that's, I come now at every project, at every engagement with that sort of at the forefront of my mind. And I feel like that's half the battle, really. Certainly with new customers, even with existing customers. So yeah, that's quite a change in the way that I sort of viewed things previously. Just coming in, previously as kind of a more of as a developer, you'd come in and just try and get the best solution. But now you're thinking about why are you delivering that solution, or why is someone else delivering that solution, and is the customer actually going to be able to utilize it and sort of communicate that and work with it? And I suppose it's more looking at things long term rather than short term is one way to put it.
Thanks, Dan. Jake, would you like to share any of your experiences as well?
Yeah, look, I think that's like OCM was a interesting topic because honestly, before I did CMA program, I think very few customers I'd worked on actually talked about it. I'm sure maybe internally they may have had some plans. I'd been part of training over the years, so similar to Dan, I've been a trainer as well, and perhaps that actually helped with some of the soft skills in CMA and being able to present and get to the end. But yeah, from a OCM perspective, we also covered a lot of other topics as well. So for example, we're talking about the value of CSDM, so the Common Service Data Model, and you might think, well, that's a little bit technical. Why would you talk about that in CMA? And my view on that one is, well, we're there to educate customer and get them to make good decisions. And CSDM could be an investment decision because they might already have CMDB. They might have already implemented certain things, and now we're asking them to change. And so it comes back to that value. What's the value proposition of following CSDM, even if you've already implemented a particular strategy with your CMDB? So yeah, the conversations always had a certain purpose. We did learn a few technical things. I recall some sessions that we had where we talked to people who worked on the back end of ServiceNow, not the back end as in the platform UI, but the back end. So, the hosting side of it and how the database is operated and how many nodes and what they can do to pull levers and knobs to make it more efficient. And I found that quite interesting. Obviously, that's not something I think that we necessarily would have expected to bring up in front of a CIO. Say, oh, by the way, we'll just get you to, we'll add a few more nodes so that you can be more, more efficient with the tens of thousands of users you have. But it was good as an architect to know that. We could certainly then relay that information to customers if they're asking, what is this? How does this work? What kind of problems might you have? Maybe there's a little bit of an overlap here. I'll mention. I don't know. I'll steal one more minute. Talk about CTA. CTA did have a bit of an overlap for sure in that technical realm. CSDM came up. I don't think we talked too much about OCM, organizational change management, but certainly the performance aspect of instances came up. I remember a statistic that I had never heard before, but I've used multiple times with customers, and that was that 90% of transactions on an instance happen on a task table. And I thought that was a really fascinating stat and something that we can use when, for example, working with a customer and say suggesting that they should maintain the platform in a way like adding data retention policies or indexing or just the way that they design custom apps and need to use tasks. So there was a lot that I got out of both programs, and you use them at different times, different audiences, different content.
I like that fact, Jake. I've stolen that now. That's mine.
And that's a good feedback for CTA program as well, right? So I think it should be a good aspect to know for a CTA as well how the backend infrastructure works. I think if it wasn't there when I was part of the CTA, Ishan, has it been introduced now in the recent courses?
No, it wasn't there.
Still not.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely one of those good areas that everybody should know. It's not just CTAs, CMAs. I guess the person who's working on the platform should understand how the backend works as well a little bit. So how are the transactions processed on a node? How are the semaphores configured? How do you actually talk about these things? Because these fact when you're talking about performance of an instance or even talking
Yeah.
best practices. So obviously, good point.
So I came across
Perfect.
this.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks, Dan.
Yep. No worries. So I did come across this issue once. Like that's how I know that nodes and how these things work. So like one of my customer instances, there was a business rule that like it's going too technical, but that was a query business rule running on this incident table. It tested everything fine until UAT, but went into production, and it went into a loop. And that's where, like, two nodes of the customer went down, and their production was down for like 3-4 hours. So they added 2 or 3 relief nodes. So service now comes to the rescue. But
Yes, I do recall the engineers who came to talk to us in that CMA session. So I think Dan said earlier we had cohort-led sessions, which was us. Each person had a topic, but then we also had ServiceNow-led sessions, and there were product people who came in. There were external speakers as well, but in this case, there were some engineers who came in, and I do recall them saying that they have multiple dashboards and reports. So they are monitoring. It's not like they just check in once a day and see how your instance is going. They do have dashboards that have this information. And as you mentioned, like if they saw something significant like that, a spike, they would likely jump into action, or maybe they have some automation as well that would jump into action, and then they'll come back and figure out what happened later.
yeah.
Just to go back to something you mentioned a little bit earlier, Jake, I think one of the most useful things out of probably both of the programs, but certainly it sounds like from both of our experiences with the CMA, is not only do you have people from ServiceNow present as part of the curriculum, but there tends to often be ServiceNow people on the course in the cohort as well. And their input and learning from them and their presentations that they give, I thought tended to be some of the most useful parts. So I think you said you had someone from, I can't remember what you said now, but we had someone from ServiceNow support. So again, kind of working on the back end, who was part of our cohort. So that was really useful learnings came out of there.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's right. It's great to have that combination of topics coming into that. Like we always felt like we were drinking from the fire hose, so to speak, because there was just so much content. Even in CTA there was a lot of content, and you're constantly thinking, do I need to know all of this for that final result? For that final assessment. I think we were prepared quite well. Once again, I won't talk too much about the board review as such, but we did get a practice run. We did learn from each other. For my cohort, at least, we got to watch each other's mock boards. So that was the practice board review. So we at least had some idea on the structure. Obviously, you get an idea on the structure, but we also the quality. I mentioned Jerry earlier. So Jerry, if you're watching, he did really well. Like I really looked at what he did, his presentation deck. So the quality of building a deck, but also the quality of presenting that deck. And I was like, that's the bar. You've got to try to hit that bar. And it is high, as you said, regarding the program earlier, Dan. You said it's hard to get it. It's hard to keep it as it should be. It's the highest certification ServiceNow have. Although I think I've seen some diagrams where CTA and CMA are on the same level, and there's obviously different inputs and different maintenance, but they are the two biggest certs. So yeah. I'll leave it at that.
I think that leads us on quite nicely. Sorry, not to take over your role, Ishan, but one of the questions that we didn't cover was how did you prepare for the final exam? I would say 3 things: practice, practice, practice. It's a horrible thing to do, but you have to record yourself, watch yourself back, work out what your stop words are, your where you say are, where you pause, so that you can get over those things. And a 4th one to add on to that, collaboration as well, as Jake just mentioned. Watch each other, give each other tips and advice, and help each other. But yeah, mainly it's practice. Do it over and over and over again until you can do it with your eyes closed, half asleep, in the middle of the night. Then you know if you can do it well, then you can smash it out of the park at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning.
Very good advice. Yeah.
Honestly, the same advice applies to the CTA program as well, because exactly the same format. So yeah, do prepare well, even for your certification, the CTA exam as well, because that's what I did as well. I think we've done it. Ishan and I used to do it together as well, just to share our insights to each other, see how we're doing, where are we lacking. Again, any questions that comes at the back of anything that we've written on the slides. So definitely that helps. Okay, I think we are almost there. Ishan, should we take a couple of questions from the chat? Thank you. So was it difficult to maintain a life and fulfill your day-to-day tasks as well as completing the program?
I'd be interested to hear Jake's experience of this. My company was, I was fortunate enough that they kind of took me off of a fair amount of customer engagement. So I was specifically given the time to complete the CMA program. However, I know for a lot of people, they were still doing their 8 hours a day, and then the CMA commitments on top of that, and then obviously their family life on top of that. So certainly for me, I was very lucky, but I think if you're not so lucky, it can be quite difficult. Jake, what was your experience?
Yeah, look, I agree with all the sentiment there, and I guess from my memories going back a few years ago, I was also quite lucky. I definitely felt like my company Enable did support me in that. So I was also fortunate, I guess, in my role that I could work on different customers. So if you're working for one customer, you might very likely have a fairly significant allocation, 40 hours or something close like that. I had a couple of customers, and so I was able to balance the customer work to still have the time. So the time was one thing, to create a hole in your schedule each week and go, hey, I need these 8 hours. The next one was the actual schedule. So we had, I think, a Tuesday, Thursday slot every day for those 2-hour webinars, and then I think we had one on a Friday as well. So, and similar to CTA had that kind of split structure across the week. It's not like it's all 8 hours in one day every week. So I probably had, well, I was lucky with the multiple customers, but I think for anyone going into it, that could be the challenge. Even if your company gives you 8 hours, where is the 8 hours? Can you still book in those calls? And ServiceNow is pretty good. I mean, they locked that in early on, so we could put that in our calendars, block it out. Hopefully, no one tries to book over it, and you defend it, vigilantly to try to always make the ServiceNow meetings. With CTA, we had them recorded, so we had that option of following up later. And I think there was even a metric in the tool in the Intrepid where if you watched it, it would tick a box, and then they knew that you'd watched it. But if you didn't, you didn't have that. So out of the 8 hours, I think once again from memory, the 8 hours was enough to do the week-to-week stuff. But on those a couple of occasions through the program where I actually had to prepare something, so my cohort-led presentation, it was on integrations. I did that about halfway through the program, and that obviously required a bit of prep. Probably at least half a day. I'd say maybe even a full day if I add up a few weekends and things. So that was probably in my own time. And then likewise, when I got to the end, the pointy end, and I prepared for the exam or the board review, I actually took a couple of annual leave days That was my choice. No one at Enable made me do it. I really wanted to be prepared. I wanted my head to be in that space. And so I think I took off like the 2 days before so that I could practice, I could relax. I didn't feel like I was clock watching, like, oh, I've got to get this done in 2 hours. And, so by the time my board review day came around, I was still nervous, don't get me wrong. It's not no walk in the park, but I did feel better because I felt prepared. And to Dan's point, practice, 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 right? You want to give yourself that time to practice.
I did exactly the same towards the pointy end, as you said, Jake. And I know a lot of other people on the cohort did. I think that's the best way to approach it. Got to, certainly as it comes to an end, you've got to give yourself some space, get in the right mindset, which is nice in the CMA programs. Unfortunately, you don't always get to do that when you're actually talking to a customer. Be nice to take an annual leave day before an engagement, but no, certainly for the program, yeah, I'd recommend that as well.
Nice.
Thanks,
Thank
Dan.
you, guys.
Thanks, Jake.
And maybe we can take one last question for the show so that we can finish in time and pass the exam. So, as a CMA, is it expected to have some kind of knowledge? I think we have already covered this through the knowledge question that we had earlier. So, statement giving best practice advice on strategic high level.
Maybe
I
I'll
don't think
make
any.
it.
Sorry, no,
Sorry,
go
you
ahead,
go.
Jake.
Yeah, no, there you go.
I was just going to say no. I would say no. No specific knowledge in specific technologies. Like they don't expect you to have any knowledge of Java, the underlying technology of ServiceNow, or anything like that. But yeah, that's it really.
Yeah, I was just going to say, interesting in that exact phrasing of that question. It says knowledge in other, not knowledge of other, and I think as architects in general, we're expected to have knowledge of other platforms, other systems, why are they used, what are their benefits, what kind of data is there, and that's because architects are almost always involved in integrations and bringing things together. So from our perspective as architects, we need to know, well, what's the source of truth for core data? Is it an Active Directory? Is it some other identity platform? And if it's HR, is there a system of record? Once again, what kind of data is there? Is it personally identifiable information, PII? Does it need to be encrypted? So while we don't necessarily have to know how to go and build a workflow in their platform or write code in their platform, I think we do need to know about those other platforms and what they do and how they work with our platform, which is ServiceNow.
Nice. Totally agree with that, Jake. All right. I think we are good. And yeah, we can wrap up. Hanit and Dan and Jake, if you have anything, please feel free.
Thank you for your time, Jake, Harneet, Ishad. It's been lovely to talk to you, and thank you to everyone on the call. I hope it's been useful. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn if you want to catch up on anything else specific.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to everyone. Thanks for joining, and thank you, Ishan and Hanit, for inviting, and thanks, Dan. It was nice to virtually meet you. Hopefully the audience today found this valuable.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Hanit. See you guys. Bye.
Thank you so much,